Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government in free markets in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, please visit wichitaliberty.org. Subscribe to the email newsletter, like the Voice for Liberty on Facebook, follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. On today's show, we welcome Congressman Mike Pompeo to the Wichita Liberty TV studios. Mike Pompeo is in his third term representing the 4th District of Kansas, which is the Wichita metropolitan area and surrounding counties, going west to include Edwards, Kiowa, and Comanche counties, and east to include Greenwood, Elk, and Chautauqua counties. Representative Pompeo went to college at the United States Military Academy at West Point, graduating first in his class and then serving as a cavalry officer patrolling the Iron Curtain before the fall of the Berlin Wall. After earning a law degree, Mike returned to his mother's family roots in south central Kansas and founded Thayer Aerospace, where he served as chief executive officer for more than a decade, providing components to commercial and military aircraft. He then became president of Century International, an oil field equipment manufacturing, distribution, and service company. Representative Pompeo serves on 2 regular committees, Energy and Commerce, which oversees energy, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications, and also on the Health Intelligence Committee, which oversees America's intelligence gathering efforts. He was also appointed to the House Select Committee on the events surrounding the 2012 terrorist attack in Benghazi, Libya. Now, Congressman Mike Pompeo. Well, Congressman Mike Pompeo, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
It's great to be with you, Bob.
So, before we really get started, this week was National Dog Day, and you posted a photo on your Facebook page of your puppy, Sherman, which I think we're showing on the screen right now. What type of dog is that?
So Sherman's a golden retriever, and he is a terror.
Okay. Does he live in Wichita or Washington?
He's a Wichita. He's a Kansas boy.
Okay, because you know the saying in Washington, if you want a friend, get a dog. I looked that up, and that's often attributed to Harry Truman, but that's kind of apocryphal by now. So, but anyway, that's a nice photo. So, well, first, have you decided yet whether you're going to run for another term next year?
I've not filed yet, but I am very, very likely going to run. We haven't made any firm commitment, but in the next month or two, we'll make an announcement. I expect that we will run again.
Okay. Well, writing about the passage of the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act that you sponsored and shepherded through Congress, at least the House of Representatives so far, the Wichita Eagle editorial board wrote, "Pompeo's willingness to take on an issue of such complexity and importance to Kansas farmers is impressive and in keeping with the tireless, deliberative process he used to get the Small Airplane Revitalization Act passed into law in 2013. Pompeo is making a name for himself in other, arguably partisan ways too, including his seat on the Benghazi Investigatory Committee and his new revelation with Senator Tom Carton of Arkansas of the Iran Treaty's side deals, but especially given the dysfunctional context on Capitol Hill, his skill for building consensus stands out." Now, whenever I find myself in agreement with Rhonda Holman of the Wichita Eagle, it's time to recalibrate and recheck my arithmetic to make sure I'm still thinking correctly. But I think she's correct in this assessment that you've had some legislative successes.
Yeah, we have. I say that our team has had some successes. It takes every bit of that. It's not just me. But it does take the willingness to dig in, grind through these things. They were the Safe and Fair Food Labeling Act, Safe and Affordable Food Labeling Act, has a lot of complexity attached to it. There's a lot of controversy around it. There are folks on both sides who are very passionate. And so it did take a willingness to sit down, sort through fact and myth, and then work a broad spectrum of groups. We got the World Hunger Organizations, not often very conservative in their outlook on the world, but to understand how important this was to feeding poor people all around the world for the next generation. And so we were able to bring in a broad swath of talented scientists and hunger organizations to convince them that this made sense, and then we were ultimately able to get the political leaders to follow. It was a lot of work, but a worthy goal, and we're very proud that it passed the House of Representatives with 275 votes. That is pretty unusual these days.
Now, I noticed Rhonda Holman did mention consensus, but if I looked, I think no Republicans voted against it, and only 2 Democrats voted for it. But that's pretty much par for the course on anything other than renaming a post office this day, isn't it?
So for the Safe and Fair Food Labeling, we got about 40 Democrats on that bill. But that's unusual. It is often the case that these things fall squarely along party lines. This one could have, but we put a lot of energy into convincing members of the Congressional Black Caucus, truly far-left Democrats, that this mattered in order for America to continue to be the breadbasket for the world. And we're pushing on. I hope the Senate will take it up before too long. I'm convinced, too, that the President will sign it. Okay. We worked very hard with the Department of Agriculture and Secretary Vilsack, very hard with the President's FDA Commissioner, to shape this legislation in a way that we believed accomplished our goals, but didn't ruffle any hardcore political feathers. And I think we achieved both of those outcomes.
So this will then move on to the Senate, I think, probably after they get back after Labor Day sometime?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And so then it will be up to Mitch McConnell and leadership over there to see if they can get this bill through. Will you have a role in lobbying senators or anything in doing that?
Been working on it for months.
Okay.
Been talking to a lot of senators on both sides of the aisle. It will go through Senator Roberts' Agriculture Committee, so we have a connection there as well. And we'll try and help them. Look, there are folks who are very concerned about genetically engineered foods. I disagree with them, but at the same time, if they're concerned about it, I want to make sure that they have the ability to consume the foods they prefer to consume. And so they should continue to be able to eat those foods that don't contain genetically engineered products. And I want to make sure that that's well understood on the Senate side. Once we crack that issue, I think there's a broad consensus about how to handle food safety in America, and I think our bill struck the right chord.
And people should know that this bill does not prohibit any food company from putting any labeling on their box telling consumers what exactly is in or perhaps not in their food. And we see that certain foods are labeled non-GMO or something like that.
Absolutely. I think the market will sort out if consumers want genetically engineered foods in their products or not. And so I think every food provider ought to be able to label their product any truthful way, right? You can't tell a lie. But if you want to say my food doesn't have GMOs, I think that's great. And you see that. I think the number today is 6 or 8% of all food labels today contain a label that says not containing genetically engineered foods. That might go down to 4% if consumers reject that idea. It might go to 100% if all consumers were to decide that they'd prefer not to eat those. I think either of those outcomes is reasonable. What we shouldn't do is put the government at any level, local, state, or federal, in the position of mandating a label for a safe product.
And especially the potential of a patchwork of regulations across the country that would be very difficult for small food producers to deal with. The big boys can probably deal with that more effectively, which is ironic because criticism of you said, well, he's just doing this for Monsanto, which is a huge company.
Yeah, Bob, it is funny. You know this very well. You work tirelessly on these free market issues. The biggest companies in America are often those who turn to government to gain market share. They try and game the system using political influence to establish their market share. There's a risk with respect to labeling that they'll do just that. A General Mills or a Monsanto or Quaker would have the capacity to deal with 1,000 different food labels. You would argue potentially, hey, that's the outcome they would like best. It would destroy their small competitors. But we were able to come up with a solution that worked for even the smallest folks. They can label Ben & Jerry's as a pretty tiny company, although now owned by a big parent. They can label their food however the heck they want. Tell the truth, market the heck out of it, and let consumers sort out the rest.
Okay. Well, let's take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Bob Weeks with Mike Pompeo for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, United States Congressman Mike Pompeo of Wichita. So, another thing you've been involved with recently is the Iran treaty, the nuclear treaty, and the side deals. Rhonda Holman of the Wichita Eagle called your work partisan. Now, I understand when we talk about things like taxation and spending or personal liberties, there are conservative and liberal positions. But I thought that the purpose of this Iran deal was to keep us safe and secure, not only the United States, but the rest of the world. So, how does something like this become a partisan issue?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't understand how it becomes partisan. When the Ayatollahs chant death to America, they don't shout death to Democrats or death to Republicans. They're coming after all of us. And so it will likely be the case, now that we're getting closer to the day we vote, it will likely be the case that almost all of the Republicans will vote against the deal and that the majority of Democrats will vote for the deal. But there'll be lots of folks on both sides of the aisle that share similar concerns. And so I don't view this at all as partisan. This would be a bad deal had it been struck by a Republican president as well. We should look at the deal on its merits and what it means for America's national security and the security of Israel and the safety and risk of a Middle Eastern nuclear arms race without a D or an R behind our names. We should just look at the outcomes that are likely to be achieved. And so I hope ultimately the debate, and we will have a good long debate in September, will not be along partisan lines, but will be about the substance of the agreement.
So it's really a remarkable story. You and Senator Tom Cotton of I can't say that for some reason, of Arkansas, you made a trip to the headquarters of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, Austria. And what was the purpose of that trip?
Tom and I decided we wanted to go speak with the actual human beings that were going to be responsible for getting in a truck and driving through the gates and physically inspecting these Iranian nuclear sites if this deal went through. We wanted to understand what their limitations would be, what they could actually do and not do, not from some politician or some bureaucrat, but from the men and women ultimately tasked to do the real verification on the deal. That's why we went.
And you found out these side deals. Is it accurate to say that that was just happenstance or luck? Or, well, I mean, you went there and asked questions, so that was the first thing you did.
It is absolutely accurate to say that we went there not knowing of the existence of these side agreements. Senator Cotton and I had both read the agreement. We had read the numerous annexes, all the pages. We'd spent a lot of time asking experts about what was in the deal and what wasn't so that we could understand as well. But no one had communicated to us, nor had anyone read or heard about the fact that there were two side deals, both signed by Iran and the IAEA, not signed by any other member of the P5+1. But no one knew these side agreements existed until, in fact, I asked a question. I asked a question of the deputy director of the IAEA about Parchin, a site that has historic, important significance to the Iranian nuclear program. And I asked how it was they were going to inspect Parchin, which was in line with our visit. How are you going to do this? What physically are you going to do? And he said to me, well, Congressman, I can't tell you that. The provisions for that agreement are in a side agreement that no American has seen. And I was taken aback. I thought maybe I didn't understand something, and I asked one follow-up question before Senator Cotton began to chime in. But I said, has any American seen this, not just a member of Congress? And he said no. Secretary Kerry hadn't seen the agreement, that they were truly secret with respect to the public or American elected officials having the opportunity to see these verification terms of the Iran deal.
And I think the administration, the Obama administration, the State Department, it says we've been briefed on the content of these side agreements, but that's quite a bit different, I think, than actually reading word for word.
You ever play the little kids game Mailbox, where somebody whispers, where someone whispers in someone's ear and the next person passes it along, and by the time you get to the end, it looks very different? I'm now engaged in a game of mailbox and being asked to vote on an Iranian nuclear agreement that I agree with the president, it's historic, based on hearsay. That is, the IAEA informed our government of what was in the deal. I've now been briefed by our government about what they say they were told, but I have no confidence that I have the full story. And it is, in fact, my duty as a member of Congress to make sure that any agreement I sign, I have seen. We laugh, Bob. There are members of Congress who demand to see the legislation when we name a post office. And yet they are prepared to vote on this deal without having seen core verification terms. And that is the process by which we will verify that serial cheaters like the Iranians have agreed to comply. It's stunning to me.
Yeah, and we don't really have much confidence that Iran will follow any agreement that is struck, do we really?
So that's kind of a separate issue, right? The first issue is what they agree to. We haven't seen that. The second one is, once they've agreed to it, do you believe they'll comply with it? My guess is that for a little while they will. They'll find it in their own self-interest to comply for a short time so that the lifted sanctions will cause Europeans and Russians and Chinese businessmen to come into the country and do business, creating an economy for them. And then once they've got that locked in, they know the sanctions won't go back in place. And so it'll be at that, the snapback will never happen. And it's at that point the Iranians will feel free to cheat on their commitments.
And we've already seen where one of the top Iranian generals, or someone who's specifically mentioned in sanctions, he's already traveled to Russia to presumably try to buy weapons. Is that right?
Qasem Soleimani is the man's name. He is the leader of the Iranian Special Forces, their terror organization. He traveled to Moscow after the deal was agreed to, with the mission of obtaining Russian weapon systems in violation of existing sanctions. So they are cheating today, and yet we're being asked to vote on another agreement that they will ultimately cheat on as well. I think when push comes to shove, a whole bunch of members of Congress who today are saying that they're going to vote for it will conclude that they cannot.
Okay, so this has to happen pretty quickly in September, is that right?
Middle of September.
Okay, well, very good. Well, we're up against another commercial break. So this is Bob Weeks with Mike Pompeo for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, United States Representative Mike Pompeo of Wichita. So, a few weeks ago, I picked up the phone and listened to a teletown hall that you hosted. And for those who haven't participated in one, it's a meeting conducted over regular telephone, the old-fashioned way, where you're connected with, what, maybe several hundred of your constituents?
No, we often, Bob, have as many as 3,500 or 4,000 people on the phone call. They've been very effective ability for folks to communicate with our office.
That was what we're going to ask. So you and other members of Congress find this an effective way to meet with constituents, so to speak?
So, Bob, I do all kinds of meetings in the community. I've spent the last 4 weeks back here in Kansas meeting with lots of folks. But, you know, if we get 20 people or 40 people, that's a pretty good-sized group. Folks are living their lives. This is a chance in the evening where, at very low cost, we can get as many as 3,500 or 4,500 people on the phone with a chance to listen to a little bit or a lot. I've heard families talk about how they'll put the phone on speaker and their children will listen.
Wow.
And so it's a great opportunity. I spend about 5 or 10 minutes at the front end talking about the things that are going on in Washington, and then we spend the remainder of the hour taking questions from a broad range of folks.
Yeah, so the participants they press a certain button and maybe they're going to get to answer a question. But in the one I listened to, near the end of it, a caller made a common complaint that we see conservatives, especially grassroots conservatives, talk about a lot, that we had Republican gains in Congress in 2010, the year you were elected, and also in 2014, the year that Republicans gained a majority in the Senate, but they still say nothing gets done. And I think by that they mean things on the conservative agenda. But
Right.
You gave a response that listed a number of things, I think started with spending reform, that have actually happened over the past half dozen years or so.
Well, it's a criticism that conservatives have not done enough. We've managed to gain some control, right? We have the majority in the House, and We don't have 60 votes in the Senate, but we've got 54, and we've not done enough. I actually think that's a valid critique. I think there were opportunities to do better than we have done. But this man was suggesting that nothing had happened, implying that there would have been no difference if Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi were still leading Congress, and that's just not true. I don't even have to articulate some of the things that they would have done had they been in control, but you can say that we've reduced the deficit from $1.4 trillion a year to a little less than $500 billion a year. And I'm not defending a $486 billion deficit by any stretch, but it's better, right? It's 2/3 of the deficit is gone. And we need to make sure that continues and continue that trajectory. And if we get the right president, we'll have an opportunity to do that. But had the Republicans not taken control of Congress, we would be back where we were 6 years ago with $1.5 trillion every year. As a percentage of GDP, it's declined as well. That's a big deal. We've reduced the size of EPA by over 25%. And you might say it should have been 50%, and I would acknowledge that smaller is better. And yet, we shouldn't despair of the things we've been able to accomplish, even though we've still had President Obama in the White House. And so we should acknowledge what really good looks like, and then accept the fact that we've done a few things that have made America with the opportunity to grow, to create economic wealth and opportunity that could never have happened with Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi in charge.
Now, last month in Wichita, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute was here and was on Wichita Liberty TV. He has the new book titled Going for Broke, Deficits, Debts, and the Entitlement Crisis. And he really painted a very bleak picture if we don't, in the United States, reform entitlements. And in particular, he's talking about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are the big three. Do you see any progress in reforming? I mean, he used the G word. By G, I mean Greece.
You bet.
That the United States is headed down that path if we don't take some long-term steps to reform. Do you see anything happening with reform in these areas coming down the pike?
Nothing in the short term. Certainly not while President Obama is in the White House. To fix these programs takes a couple things coming together. The first is the American public has got to accept the premise that you described. They have to acknowledge that without reform, we are headed for a economic cataclysm. I believe that. It's why I gave up my day job and ran for Congress, was this very issue. When the American people come to accept that, they will elect a leader who will take that on as an important task. President Obama didn't come to the White House to solve long-term spending issues. I am hopeful that in this next presidential election, whoever is elected, from whichever party, sees that as the measure of their success at their time in the White House. If that's the case, if a leader is prepared to go do the right things, and frankly, Social Security isn't very hard. Medicare is trickier, more complex. We made it worse with the Affordable Care Act. That is, we made fixing Medicare more difficult. And Medicaid, too, has some complexity, but these are all just math problems. We can solve them. We have a handful of years left to do that. Paul Ryan would tell you another 3 or 4 or 5 years, and if we don't begin to find the solution, it becomes almost intractable. But with the right leader, we can do it, and I'm very hopeful that that will be a primary point of discussion during the presidential election, and leaders will take charge and solve these problems.
So that's, very difficult, and people worry. I mean, when you get to be my age, you're thinking about drawing Social Security before too terribly long. It's kind of scary, and you think, we've paid that all of our lives as working people. We deserve that, and that's what everybody thinks. But I really wonder about the millennials, what they really think about some of these programs.
Yeah, Bob, you and I are probably okay. We're probably, systems will probably survive without any change and provide us, depending on how long we make it, provide us with what we have been promised. My son, who's 25, has no chance. And today he's paying in. And we have to reform these in a way that makes sure it's not only around for my dad, who's in his 80s, and me, who's in his 50s, but my son, who's in his 20s. And he'll have children one day, too, I expect. And we have to fix it. It's our duty as leaders to go tackle these hard problems, and I'm very hopeful that the next president will come alongside and do that.
Okay. Well, Representative Mike Pompeo, thank you for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.